change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Chappell and I'm here for another special episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. I love these episodes where I have a special guest, and this one is extra special. I think it's going to be really meaningful and really fill a gap from many of our, probably all of our other podcasts. She'll correct me in a minute because she just listened to all of our podcasts, but I'm here with Peggy Maher, who's a Chief Development Officer at Catholic Health of Long Island. And just to give a little reference, as the Chief Development Officer, Catholic Health is a $3 billion comprehensive healthcare system serving the entire Long Island community. It's also Long Island's third largest employer, and also the place where I have my favorite Italian restaurant. And don't ask me the name, I can't remember, but I get the chicken parm with vodka sauce, and it's absolutely amazing. Every time I go to Long Island, I go back. Peggy's held fundraising positions at Stony Brook University, Columbia University, University of Arkansas, New York, Cornell. She has a BA in Asian Studies, which I'm so curious about, and for a BA in Asian Studies from Williams College and Master's in Public Administration from Columbia School of International Public Affairs. Absolutely an underachiever, no doubt. Peggy, it's fantastic to have you here. Thanks so much for joining.
Oh, no, I'm so flattered. I'm the last person who expected to be in this seat with you today, Nathan. Thank you. I feel like I'm a fangirl for sure. Like you said, I've been listening to methodically to all of the Fundraising AI podcasts. You and Scott have done an incredible service for us to open this topic in a way that's really necessary. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's so funny how we met, because I was doing a webinar. I don't know if you remember which one. It was some webinar, maybe Community Boost or something like that. And you posed a question that really struck me. And this doesn't happen a lot. In fact, it started our conversation and kind of this kinship around, what makes fundraising, pure, what makes AI, essentially help amplify individual intent versus just project at it. I recall in this webinar, you posted something in the chat. And again, I was like, can we continue this conversation? And so we just had these long email banters back and forth, which led to a couple conversations. And then you're an absolute glutton for punishment, because you went to vacation of all places and some gorgeous, location up in upstate. And you decided to listen to all the episodes of the Fundraising AI podcast. So total judgment on that part for you. But thank you for that hyperspeed, I guess.
It was like a crash course for me. And I recommend it to anyone, not just to kind of get the basic vocabulary of AI as it relates to fundraising and nonprofits, but also to kind of get a sense of some of the other players and the facets of AI in this business. It's not just frontline fundraising. A lot of it has to do, obviously, with prospecting. You and Scott have deep background there, but also, from our position in leadership and really listening to people who know so much more about this than I ever will. Some of your guests have already forgotten more about AI than I'll ever know. So I found it super helpful.
I doubt that's true, but it's also why this makes this conversation extra special from the leadership perspective. When I shared earlier that this fills a gap, a pretty significant gap that we have had on this podcast, which is, we've talked to plenty of others that are like boots on the ground, and, we talk about fundraising and donor relations and all those things. But really when this comes down to, and I know I can speak for Scott as well, is that when we've seen success or failure in the hundreds of clients that we've worked with over the last few years, it has very little to do with data or models and has everything to do with people and culture. And of course, leadership are ultimately responsible for people and culture. And so I'll read this and I pulled this out of the archives. So when we were on the webinar together, you made a comment and it was public. So I feel okay sharing it. Hopefully, correct me if I'm wrong. You wrote this sentiment. This is the sentiment that really caught me. You said, I think my unease with AI is that I think it'll be very, very good at imitating human voice and emotion, and that we'll be using it more to project humanity on our donors. Part of me worries we'll lose the essential element of human-to-human contact the more we use AI. And I think that started your, I don't know if I don't want to speak for you, but your inquiry into like, what is AI and what are the responsible applications to nonprofit, it really started a conversation between you and I. It struck me deeply because as a leader, you're thinking about it more than just, I need to deliver more results tomorrow. You're thinking about it from a lens of my organization and beyond. So I don't know if this started your AI epiphany. I don't know what your AI epiphany is, but was it that just, or it must have been running around in your head for a little while and then it just started to come out. And then it sounds like you've been on this just really great path of exploration over the past few months.
It has been super interesting for me personally. And I have to say, I've been doing fundraising for over 25 years now. And at a certain point, you hit these moments where you can start to feel in your career like rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. AI is one of these opportunities to get out of that cycle and have something that's fresh, exciting, and a little bit terrifying to think about. So the exchange that you and I had during that webinar wasn't so much my AI epiphany, which I'll be happy to talk about if you're interested. That came later.
Absolutely.
That came
Okay,
later.
perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
Guide us through all of that.
What I was expressing there was my unease, okay? And this was really before I started thinking deeply or more deeply about AI as it impacts our business. And I like to think I have natural curiosity. Like most of my colleagues in fundraising, we're curious about people, we're curious about relationships, we're curious about experience and how to explore that with the people we work with, the donors we work with. It's a critical element of the fundraising process, right? And I just kept feeling this dis-ease with AI because of what I was expressing in that comment. If I could have, I would have emphasized the word very, very. My
right.
dis-ease comes from the idea that I have, my impression, that AI is not going to be okay at emulating human voice. It's going to be very, very, very good at that. And so this isn't something we can just dismiss and say, this is going to feel like a talking robot. This is a blunt instrument that can never take the place of human contact. I think it's going to be exceptional at this. Okay. And that's where my dis-ease comes from. To unpack it a little bit further, I'd say I don't think I'm alone in the industry as a leader in fundraising at having had to play a dual role in the leadership position. And one element of that is the staff-facing role, where you're organizing your fundraising team and you're building strategies and you're asking questions like, how should we implement AI and what's the best use of that? How do we do it ethically? Okay, for example. The other element is the upward-facing role, the upward management piece. And if my guess is right, I'm not alone in often working with executive teams who are not fundraising experts and who are always looking for ways, as they well should, to be saving money, reducing staff overhead, and so on. And so we're constantly in a position of having to defend staff and our fundraising enterprise, if you will, from the pressures of transactional fundraising, right? Because transactions are that's efficiency, isn't it? Right? You're saving costs. You're only using the minimal number of people and resources to get the job done, and you're transacting donors as fast as possible. Right? Part of my job historically and even today has been to help leadership understand that what we do is not a transaction, it's a relationship. And so my unease with AI, I think in part comes up because it's going to be so effective at emulating human voice. What position is that going to put leaders like me in vis-a-vis leadership, executive leadership, to be replacing staff or replacing other tools with AI, right? And I want to get my hands around that a little bit before it's too late. So that's why I decided to do the deep dive on fundraising AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really delicate balance. I found myself in, a 20-year fundraising career where ultimately the goals kept on going up every year.
Right.
We were essentially by numbers raising more money from less people. And so, found ourselves, and this is what led to the writing of my first book, which was this idea. I was sitting around with a PhD on my team at UC San Diego, and we started using the words, which is horrifying to me, we need to build a better mousetrap. And those exact words, which are, haunt me to this day.
The mouse.
Right, exactly. Referring to donors, of course, as mice. And this was the epiphany I had, which was at that time of like, how did it come to this? Now, I started fundraising in the year 2000 with a Rolodex, and the value of my the assets that I have were based in that Rolodex, like the quality of my relationships and my ability to pay our bills and to do the things we needed to do were based on relationships, not transactions. So how was at that point, 15 years later or something, the pendulum had swung so far to these like transactions. And so I totally understand that. And then at the same time, as leaders, right, the responsibility to the bottom line of the organization to drive efficiency. And those two things, I think in this day and age, don't need to be mutually exclusive. I think that we can deliver personalization at scale using AI, but we need to do that in really responsible ways. And I applaud you as a leader for looking under the hood and seeing, what's here and what can drive performance, but also protect the sanctity of what fundraising is and the essence of what fundraising is, so we don't trade relationships for those transactions. I think this is where I find a big delta in the sector of AI adoption, and be curious to see how you respond to this. But yesterday I led a meeting in Seattle at AFP Icon we've actually posed a question to a group of both practitioners and to platforms. And big question was, what are the greatest barriers to AI adoption in the nonprofit sector today? And after a really great, robust conversation by both, it really came down to two things. It came down to leadership and leadership buy-in specifically. And then adjacent to that was AI governance. And I say that it's adjacent because without AI governance, leaders say, well, we don't want to use it because we don't have any governance. And absence of governance, don't use it at all.
Right.
And at the same time, I'd be curious to see how you feel about this, but about probably 2/3 of your employees are using AI, whether you know it or not.
Absolutely.
And in that, they have fear because they're fearful of being found out because they're doing something that's not deputized, if you will. So
right.
I'm curious, do you agree, disagree that kind of leaders hold the key in either embracing, adopting, guiding what's acceptable and what's not, I guess, in this new world? Or how are you kind of wrestling with that these days?
It's a great question. And I'm not sure leaders hold the key to success with it, but I am sure that we hold the key to failure with it. If we are not willing to and that's part of why I was interested to talk with you openly today, because I'd love to make it more okay for chief development officers to say what they don't know about AI. I don't feel like I am going to be able to solve the puzzle of AI for my team. It's going to take my whole team working together, truly, bringing insights from annual fund, from prospect management, from frontline fundraising, from the events perspective, from the gift processing perspective. All of these teams are going to have to chime in order for us to actually succeed with AI. Now, my role is going to be important in terms of putting guardrails around that, ensuring that we are, we're a healthcare system. We have a lot of sensitive information. All donor information is sensitive on some level, but ours also is guided by HIPAA. So we have to be really buttoned up on this if we want to stay, clear of any potential pitfall. That's absolutely going to rest on my shoulders to make sure that we stay. I guess that's the governance piece in a sense.
Right.
But what I don't want to do is be the roadblock that prevents those who are really engaging with AI in a lot of different ways that I'm not from bringing forward their best thinking. So we have to be facilitators.
So I love that. And it really has more to do with creating the space, the safe space to explore, to learn, to grow, to share, than it does like providing the professional development resources on how to be a statistician or a data scientist or any of that. And I've seen this a few times where, this idea, and in fact, I created a keynote based on this called the Curiosity Code, essentially using curiosity as a way to unlock human potential. Because I think about my career for 20 years, mostly, I was kind of a tyrant as a fundraising leader, which was like, I had this goal and I knew that I kept my job if I hit the goal, and therefore became really big into measurable incentives. So KPIs and on both good and bad.
Right.
And really, would use conversations like, keep your eyes on your paper, stay focused on your goal, and just don't ask questions, just go do that one thing. And I think that leaves so much on the table in our sector and probably created more transactions because of that kind of just like really bifurcated nature of just saying, just do your one thing. But I've seen some leaders now create this culture of curiosity where they're empowering, questions as much as answers, and not just questions to ask questions, but questions around like, well, what if we rethought our donor experience? Or what if we, thought a different way about using AI to improve this aspect? And so I love your view on, the leadership effort being focused on essentially embracing that curiosity and bringing people together.
Yeah. I'm not proud of this, but it took an AI epiphany for me personally as a leader to not get off the block about this. Because as I said, I'd been engaging. Actually, the first time I heard you speak was at the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners last year in Orlando.
Okay.
And it was a great presentation. I took a lot away from it. I was introduced to the generosity crisis, lots of great things I came away with. But it didn't change my mind about AI fundraising per se, right? After we had connected, about my dis-ease with AI, and I dug a little deeper, one of the messages I heard you and Scott repeating productively was start with the things that you least want to do and see how AI can help you transform those,
Right.
So I was really between a rock and a hard place. I would not have done this otherwise. But I was in one of those situations where I had to send a message to a donor that I was deeply reluctant to send. We were losing a staff member that the donor had funded to do a specific job. Donor was thrilled with the person who had been hired. And she, for her own reasons, had decided to take a different job. She wanted to go back into clinical work. And it wasn't anything to do with, the organization, but it was already sharing this information with the donor, this news. And so I gave ChatGPT a prompt and I said, listen, I have to tell a donor, something I don't want to share and they're going to be disappointed. And this is the details I have to offer to them. And it did a brilliant job crafting an email for me that instantly helped me hone the message, get it done, sent it off, was well received. I mean, this could not have been a more persuasive use case for me, right? Because it truly solved a problem that I did not want to deal with. So that was my AI epiphany where I thought, oh my gosh, like this thing actually did as good a job as I might have done in the thing I was reluctant to do.
And that's where early modern AI, so November 2022, ChatGPT came out. So many people were so quick to dismiss it because it didn't perform like that immediately. And there's still a lot of leaders who tried it then who are like, oh, it doesn't work, it's not there. But going back to your other sentiment of like, it's going to be very, very, very good. Now we're talking about AI is not measured in days, weeks, or months or years. It's measured in cycles, and it's not built based on, it's not dependent on how many, I would say kids in hoodies in Silicon Valley are programming it. It's refining itself at this exponential pace. And so at this point, Chat I've been using since the beginning, knows my voice as well as I know my voice. And it can do the things that really, I think, especially in your situation, are things that are a little bit like head heavy. And not to say like critical thinking is super important. We still need to be able to be, really maintain the essence of critical thinking. But wouldn't it be great to be able to offload some of the arduous pain of some of those conversations to get a first draft, to just get down the road so that you could reserve more brain power for the things that your superpower is and just inspiring or bringing people together. So it sounds like you had that moment, which is fantastic. How is that translated to your thoughts around, as a leader to, those under your leadership?
Well, that kind of cracked the door for me to say, this is something I need to take seriously. This is operationalized. We can put this to use. It's still kind of held in reserve. Like, okay, so that's something I didn't want to do. But one of the things I do like to do is writing.
Yeah, you told me that earlier on.
And
it's
never
almost always the writers. Yeah, it's almost always the writers who dismiss, large language models first because they're like, I like writing, so.
Yeah, I never thought of myself as the world's best fundraiser. I don't have an MBA. I don't know that I'm a great leader. I'm someone who does the best with what she has, under the circumstances, and has been lucky to achieve some success with fundraising. But one of the things I've always held in myself in high regard about is my writing ability. That there's no way a language model could write the way I do and reach into the heart of the donor with my letter, and touch them to where they call me and say, I just had to tell you, it really meant so much to me. I've had that experience enough times that I have this idea about myself, right?
Right.
And ditto for thing I've heard you talk about often, which is speech writing on behalf of leadership, right? Writing for the president of the hospital or the CEO of the system or whatever it might be. And so I had to do one of these speeches recently for an event we were going to have, and I decided, let's see. So crafting an appropriate prompt with enough detail in it, the product I got back in what I would have taken me 2 days or at least 2 4-hour sessions of deep work thinking.
Right.
In 4 minutes was product absolutely to my standard that I could then polish and present for approval. It just blew me away, right? There's no way we can't be doing this. There's no way we can't be using this. So now I'm like all in, right? Now I'm a true believer.
Yeah.
And
so
I'm coming back to my team to say, hey, this has been my experience. What are you guys doing? No surprise, right? They're knee deep in it, right? One of the staff members is telling me how she's prompting ChatGPT to give her some ideas for how to craft an email as she's on her commute in the morning so that when she gets to the office, she's already got the fodder, right? And she can hit the ground running. Or the events team is using it in line with something I've heard you say to, prepare gift basket descriptions for the raffle, right? The job everybody loathes doing, and on and on. So we've made it a feature of our all staff meetings once a month. We do breakout sessions by functional area, and then we share back things that each of these work teams is using AI for. And it's, I really want to continue that practice because the platforms are going to become exponentially more powerful. We've got to keep up with that and be discovering new use cases, and it's been really productive.
I love all of that. In fact, you've really on your own uncovered really the true unlock of building that culture of curiosity, which is peer learning. While it's great to have podcasts and even hire consultants to come and do things, it really comes down to the nuance of like me in my professional role, my department and their role within an organization, and then to have that peer learning from each other. And so it's one of the number one things that we encourage people to do is like set up an open forum to allow people to share what they're doing and share the good and the bad, right? Like, oh, I tried this thing and it was just awful at it. Don't do what I did, or do it a different way. Or this thing is just like a true unlock to this potential.
Right.
And, just to encourage that. I mean, we've done it where we paid for lunch for people who want to do this like lunch and learn, since it's hybrid and remote stuff. But just to allow that shared learning is one of the two main unlocks. The other main unlock that we find is voice, and using advanced voice mode. When you speak to your computer or your phone and it speaks to you, it's very interesting in how voice and our brain receives things that are actually not just text, but in voice. In fact, in the speech that you were just doing, one of the things that I use this for a lot, if I'm writing or I'm doing a new keynote or something, I'll put that keynote or speech into NotebookLM. And I don't know if you've used this yet, but this is a tip for anyone that wants to understand how something would be portrayed. And so I'll take a speech or PowerPoint, put it into NotebookLM, have it play it back to me as a podcast.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I'm able to understand like essentially a glimpse of how it would be perceived by someone on the outside, what was really apparent and what was missing, and then allows me to kind of refine that. And so there's just so many great opportunities. So like bring people together and also explore with voice. When you do, it's really kind of ridiculous in how it just unlocks this weird portion of your brain of thinking this isn't just a screen with a prompt. It's something that is this like truly interactive, iterative process.
So at the CPG conference last October, you had uploaded, I think, the PDF version of Generosity Crisis and demoed this for the audience there. So at our last all staff, I uploaded this grant application that we had borrowed from our colleagues on the government fundraising side of the house. And it's one of those state applications that could not be more
horrible. Yeah.
It's just flogging your way through it.
No,
just
right.
Put anybody to sleep. So I uploaded that in the meeting and then asked NotebookLM to do its podcast version of it, and the gasp, from the audience, when hearing the dialogue and having it summarized and so concisely and hitting the main points and things. I mean, it really does, it's a very visceral response that you get.
Yeah, look at you, like mic drop, you're like done, who's teaching?
Smart, Nathan, thank you.
That's amazing. I mean, I think it's such a great tool, and it's interesting because I just surveyed a group at a university the other day. There's about 100 people in the room. I don't think one person in the room had used NotebookLM. And I was like, oh my gosh, like tonight, this is your homework, go do it. It could not be easier. And at the very least, I mean, it's good at distilling information, and so is ChatGPT, but
Right.
it's good at playing it back to you. And it's something about voice. When you hear it back, it's received differently by our brain.
Yeah.
And so just doing that and playing around with that, it's just, it's great. A friend of mine, Mallory Erickson, and I talk about her a lot. She has a podcast called What the Fundraising and has a book called the same, What the Fundraising. She just launched a software application called Practivated, which is essentially a voice bot that can take the persona of a donor, not a total donor because privacy, but the persona of a donor, and you can role play with it. And it's done in voice, and it's so interesting because I played with it. And I had this like really organic conversation, and it just started recalling like all these solicitations I had had throughout my career. And it was like the fear of rejection and the fear of like, what's the person going to ask? And I thought about, the fact that, I used to bring all my team together. If we were going to do a big ask or bring the team together, we'd huddle in a room and it's like, what are we going to ask? And what if they say no? And what if they do this? And,
right.
And this is like in the privacy of your own computer, just to have these dialogues in voice. It's super powerful. So I think to your point, like we're just at the beginning, and because this technology is exponential and it adapts and it grows essentially, quote unquote, so quickly, I think having those forums for your team regularly, like once a month or whatever, to share, I think is so important.
Right. So this is where I want to ask you some questions.
Oh, okay, right. This is where, go ahead.
I think the role-playing thing really brings it out, right? You're prepping for meetings and you're working on your skill set to be convincing a donor or persuading a donor or uncovering a donor's innate desire to make a gift, right? But I've also heard you say that, is it Professor Malik has that statistic that AI is 87% better at
Yeah, you nailed it.
Of changing behavior or ideas than humans, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just evidence-based, right? That's a fact. And it brings up for me this sense of anxiety about, if AI could persuade a donor faster, better, where do I come in, right?
Right.
And I wonder what your thoughts are as you're talking to people in the industry about that.
Yeah, this is something that I struggle with a lot, and there's no easy answers to this. And I think my opinion on this will evolve over time, I'm sure. One is if I say no to any bot that portrays itself as a human, and there's a lot of people that hard stance, not just in fundraising, but just in the world, like bots that portray themselves as humans are bad for humanity, the future of humanity. And so there's that school of thought. And then there's the other thought of, well, fundraising is already kind of manipulative, in how people basically work to convince a person to give to their organization. And, what's the difference if a bot does that? And I see both of those arguments. And at the same time, I get concerned, one, to your point, that bots have read every book on human psychology and consumer behavior and, are far better than we are at the average human of convincing you to take their point of view. Also understanding how AI works. Essentially, AI works by giving it a target. The target is a goal, and a bot will take the most expedient path of achieving its target, its goal. And that would be manipulation or anything in between. It wouldn't matter, right? It doesn't have consciousness. And so in fact, our earliest conversation about like using AI to project on humanity led me to writing an article on, what it means to be human in the age of bits and bots. And I don't think the answer is clear yet. I think that AI can be very helpful in telling stories, connecting people with mission, to sharing things that an organization is doing that may be aligned with a person's interest. But I believe, and this is not a totally popular belief, that ask should be between a human and a human. That if we relegate the ask to a bot, I think it actually sells us short from a biological reaction on both parties, that our brains will not release oxytocin. And this is true. Our brains, even in a Zoom call, it's minute compared to like a human and human, right, interaction. And so building a deep visceral connection is something that we're wired to do as humans, that if we relegate that to a bot who can't portray that and it won't be received, that what we'll have is more transactions and less deeper relationships. And so that's at least where I stand today. I also struggle with the economics because it's inevitable that this technology will continue to be more persuasive and drive revenue very quickly. And at the same time, fundraisers are expensive and, they get sick and they take breaks and they need training and all the care and feeding and all, they're very expensive to essentially maintain and manage. So you're going up against, back to your leadership conversation and driving efficiency to an organization. That's a real tension that leaders have to wrestle with now.
Right. Right. I think you're onto something. I like your oxytocin argument. I think there's something to that. I've been thinking about it not so much from the chemical perspective, but thinking about gratitude. I got the idea from your first book that you kind of were thinking about generosity as being the problem. In my business, the thing that triggers generosity in the healthcare sphere, anyway, I don't know if this is true for colleagues elsewhere, it's a gratitude experience. And
Right.
so whatever we do in healthcare fundraising kind of turns on the grateful patient and that experience of gratitude. And so I started asking whether it would be possible for an AI to generate gratitude or elicit gratitude in a person, right? Or in a patient. And I don't know, maybe I should be convinced that could be the case, but it felt like it's going to take two to make that go right, that it's going to take two humans to elicit gratitude. What do you think?
And I think this is where it will evolve over time. I mean, humans for thousands of years have essentially been conditioned to be in community and follow that one-to-one contact. And that's why your brain rewards, gratitude with serotonin and dopamine for both parties. The paradox of generosity is essentially that the more you give, the better you feel.
Right.
The better you feel is a biological reaction to what we're wired to do as humans.
Right.
And Arthur Brooks, who's a Harvard professor who teaches on happiness, I think one of the top people in the world on happiness, really has broken down the research around these like one-sided relationships. And so he's studied it from an anxiety and depression and happiness perspective of people on Zoom or just watching video content. And when in brain scans, your brain is not releasing really any chemical reaction around that oxytocin if you're just like watching this video, even if you really appreciate it. And so I think we will probably evolve as humans as the more pervasive this technology becomes. Mm-hmm. I think we'll probably evolve. But in the meantime, I think this brings up, probably for those of us that were fundraising for a really long time, it brings up the biggest question, which is, are humans essential in the future of fundraising? And I think that's something that leaders, by, wanting to or not, will have to, wrestle with. And I think many have just said no to all AI. And that then creates that vicious cycle of fear and all of that within their teams that are already using it. So yeah, these are new times with interesting ideas. And I think while maybe we don't have all the answers, we need to have the questions, and we need to be willing to ask the questions and wrestle with these together collectively.
Right. It also links in some way in my mind to the dialogue and the conversations that are going on out there about the attention economy. Mm-hmm. I tend to think all of us are a little bit oxytocin deprived right now. Especially right now.
For sure. No doubt.
It's kind of getting worse a little bit, right? We're all living on social media, and we're all communicating through Zoom, and we have fewer and fewer IRL interactions, right? Where you get that oxytocin hit, if you will. So it's not so much the ability to draw donor attention to us that concerns me, because I think AI will do that very well. It's how do we ensure that donors feel paid attention to? How do we deliver that chemical hit to them? Or to put it in nicer terms, how do we serve as the ambassadors of that wonderful feeling of connection that rewards people for being part of our effort and part of our community of humans who are trying to achieve something through fundraising?
Yeah. And I think it was in one of our earlier conversations that you shared when I was, I'm posing this question around are humans essential in the future of fundraising, and when is fundraising not manipulative? And I think it was you, and if not, just nod your head and take credit for it. But it was, fundraising is not manipulative when we're putting the donor at the center of the relationship. And I'm pretty sure it was you, because you equated it to healthcare, which of course, modern healthcare is all about putting the patient at the center of the care.
Right.
And I think that's so smart. And it stuck with me that if technology can support that, that's amazing. But I think the question then is, continuously, because it's exponential technology, does this process, does this thing that we're looking at using technology to do keep the relationship at the center, right? Does it keep the donor at the center of the relationship? And if it does, then it should be, I think, really considered whether or not that it is, something that can preserve and protect trust and support efforts at scale.
Exactly. And that did come out of our earlier conversation where, everything we do at my health system, we really make the concerted effort to be patient-centered. Patient-centered care, every patient, every encounter, every time is our motto. And AI can be a way to enhance that. I think it can be used to surprise and delight donors.
Right.
But that's the trigger to bring them back into contact with the community that they belong to when they're part of what we're doing. They have opted in to advance our mission. And so that makes them part of our family. And that feeling of belonging and connection, I think, is going to have increasing weight in this world that is atomized and, more and more parasocial instead of being fully social.
I love that. And, as a leader, kind of ending on this back to where we started, as a leader, that direct responsibility of, informing, guiding, your fundraising team on ensuring that AI doesn't replace humanity, but amplifies it, right? And guiding your team, because you'll see practices that will be highly automated and transactional. And as a leader, you have the ability to guide and have conversations around, well, what are the applications or implications to those things, like short-term and long-term? And so I love that you're already doing that. I love that you're already bringing together, people to discuss, what they're doing and seeing some of the values of how AI can support our world. And I think I get overwhelmed sometimes with just the sheer amount of challenges and headwinds that are facing our sector. My epiphany the other day or a week or so ago was how daunting would this moment be at this time with all of the public scrutiny and the political scrutiny and the decline in charitable participation and civic engagement. How daunting would this moment be if at the same time we were not presented with the technology that could amplify our efforts in significant ways, in ways that we could never imagine before? This moment would be overwhelmingly depressing. And I find myself very optimistic because at this moment, with all of these challenges, we have the ability to rethink and reimagine things that we've done in the past and really use technology in this way that has never been before possible. So it's really exciting for the person who's willing to kind of think outside the box.
Yeah, agree. And I think that, listening to our teams is key here and letting people really shine creatively with it and simply being the consistent voice guiding the conversation back to, is this in the patient or the donor's best interest, right? If we were them, how would we feel about the use of this, right? Would we find it engaging and delightful, or would we find it a little off-putting and possibly eroding of trust, right? Thinking about things from the donor's perspective is really healthy, I think.
That's fantastic. Can I ask you one more question? Because now I'm like, okay, keep on wrapping up. But there's another question, because if you are if you're a rank and file fundraiser and operations person or prospect researcher, donor relations person, and you're working in an organization that is not oriented toward curiosity or allowing for these conversations or exploration, do you have any recommendations for, and I get this a lot, so it's a very practical question, like how does a person who's not working for a leader that kind of gets it, quote unquote, what are things that they could do or think about? Or should they just leave their job and go find a place that has that culture?
Well, maybe they want to be thinking that way. If it's, if it's just a closed down culture that doesn't offer any creative outlet, that's a little troubling, right? But presuming it's a run-of-the-mill sort of being run by boomers and Gen Xers and simple frustration with the lack of attention being paid to the opportunity here. First of all, understand that most of the people in my job are just fighting fires all the time, right? It's not because we don't want to be thoughtful and creative and open-minded and have these open-ended discussions. We're curious too, most of us.
Right.
But the job doesn't allow a lot of time for, backing up and blue sky thinking, So understand where we're coming from, for one thing. But one strategy I've used in my career to convince leaders or managers above me the possibility of impact is by solving a problem. Right? Showing the use case that sort of, look what we could do if we approached it this way. This is what it would look like. And bringing that, this is how we could solve the problem. So taking it out of the theoretical and really using it to help me fight the fire, if you will, is always going to get the attention of me, certainly, and I think a lot of people who are in my role.
I love that, and I'm stealing that for next week when I'm speaking to a group of operations professionals at children's hospitals. And I was asked to speak on this topic because, again, I get it, right? It feels a little overwhelming. It's like I have all this pent up creativity and I want to do these things. And, how do I get attention? I think breaking it down to a practical application of a leader saying, oh, wow, I didn't know you could do that. And by the way, thank you, because that just saved us, in your case of the use case you were sharing earlier, saves you hours, right?
Right.
I mean, that's time back to be able to do more human things, right? And so I love that. Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I am so grateful for you. I'm so excited to see the journey that you're on and where you're going to go. I mean, you're just on, all the right paths. And I think people that are on your team are just going to thrive with that same mindset, what's possible. And so I know we'll stay in touch. And I really feel like this is going to be a super helpful conversation for leaders and those that are, looking at the evolution of their career as they move over or move up the ladder in that role and responsibility of what it is to drive an organization in this new era.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Nathan. I'm so lucky. My team is beyond exceptional. I'm just hanging on to their cape, honestly. And I like to think that it's more my job just to get the roadblocks out of their way. And this is such a great area for us to let them shine, because they're going to take this off in a way that I would really struggle to if I was trying to do it single-handedly.
Amazing. Well, Peggy, thank you so much. I look forward to staying in touch, and we will put a bunch of notes in the podcast so people can kind of follow along and follow you on LinkedIn and all those good things. So thanks for joining me. And for everyone that is jumping into Fundraising AI, stay tuned for another podcast with Scott and I coming soon, where we're going to go over a lot of updates in the new, in all the new models that have just come out and then been rolled back and then rolled forward. It's been a turbulent few weeks in the world of AI, and we can't wait to share that with you. So thanks for tuning in.